Hello, this is Francisco Cribari, and today I want to do a quick edit of a color image in Darktable. So let me open this raw file here, and this photo was made with a Fujifilm X Pro 2 camera with 1000 ISO, and the first thing that I would do here would be to perform some lens correction. Let me activate the module, and it will do some lens correction, distortions, and TCA. And after that, I would probably recover some shadows and highlights. Let me see here. Let me activate the module with the defaults. Let me reduce the shadow to 30 or so, and change that from Gaussian to bilateral filter, which I prefer. I find it safer. And when you open a raw file, Darktable by default applies some sharpening and a base curve. The base curve that's applied to my image here is this Fujifilm-like. You can experiment with other base curves, or you can even perform some changes here if you want. And then what I would do after that would be to add some local contrast to the image. Let me activate the module. I'm gonna use local Laplacian filter with the module defaults. And after that, I could add some contrast. The best way to add contrast, in my opinion, is to use the tone curve. So you can do some S-like tone curve here, or you can use this mad contrast preset that comes with Darktable. It works quite well, in my opinion. You should pay attention to this option here, scale chroma. In automatic, the curve will cause changes in both lightness and saturation, and if you change that to manual, it will only affect lightness. And I usually use manual in my black and white images, and in color images sometimes I leave that in automatic. And then now let's talk about colors. You can go to color correction to increase or decrease saturation. You see here you can increase saturation, you can decrease saturation, and so on. And let me bring that back to 1. And you can also perform some split toning here if you want. And those are the highlights and those are the shadows. But there is a better way of performing split tones, which is here in the effects group. You use the split tone module, and this compress parameter here indicates the region of the midtones that you are excluding from the split toning. For instance, let me bring the shadows more to, say, violet, and you can select a custom color here, but let me violet, and let me bring the highlights more to a yellowish tone, and preserve the midtones. You see that the image now has an antique look, a vintage look. So that was before, and this is after. And you can reduce saturation here for each color, and control the hue and so on. So if you want an image with that look, you can experiment with the split toning. Let me deactivate that. And now let's talk about colors. You can go to the color zones module, and here you have 3 tabs: lightness, saturation, and hue. and then you can adjust lightness, saturation, and hue. You see those triangles in the bottom, those are the nodes. You can move them around with your mouse, and you see this circle here. It controls the impact of the adjustment on the adjacent colors. You can increase or decrease its size with the mouse wheel. So let's do something like this here. Let me click on the color picker here and click on a given color, and it will indicate me that this color is around here. I can move the node, the triangle, to the exact location, and with lightness, I can darken that, or I can make that color lighter. I can also increase or decrease saturation for that range of colors, you see. And we can also change the hue for those colors here. And then if you increase or decrease the size of the circle, you can control how the adjustment impacts adjacent colors. So that's very useful. This module comes with some presets. If you click here in the hamburger menu, you see that there is a preset for black and white film. You see it converts to black and white, zeros the saturation, and it does also some lightness adjustment. And you have a preset here for black and white skin tones, which desaturates all colors but those related to skin tones. And natural skin tones is quite useful for portraits when the skin tone is overly saturated. And then polarizing filter is quite useful for landscape shots, and this one desaturates all colors but colors that are somewhat related to red. But let me go back to the defaults here. And so by using this module, you can individually adjust some colors and change lightness and so on. For instance, I can click here on, let me click on the color picker here. Oops. And let me zero, turn off, and you click on the color picker and it's an area. For instance, suppose that I want her leather jacket lighter, but I don't want to affect the skin tones, so I can move those triangles here. The skin tones are around here. Let me fix that, and let me lighten this area here, reduce the size of the circle, and I can do that without impacting her skin tones too much. See, that was before, that's after. And then you can make some very precise adjustments that way. Let me deactivate the module. I don't want to use this module now. What I want to show you is another module, which is color balance. It's extremely useful. You see here lift, those are for the dark tones, gamma is for the mid-tones, and gain is for the highlights. And then you can individually adjust each of the primary colors here, red, green, and blue. Or you can just use the factor lever here, and it will perform adjustments on all three colors. What I usually do here to add some color contrast is to enter a negative number here for factor in lift, for instance minus 0.040, and then by doing that I'm darkening the dark tones, and I enter positive numbers here for midtones 0.40, and for highlights 0.40, for instance. And by doing that, we add some color contrast to the image, and that makes the image look better in my opinion. Let me go back to that. Color balance, I can even increase here in the midtones. Let me try 0.050. And finally, we could perform some denoising if we wanted. We have several modules that can be used for denoising. I usually work with raw denoise and denoise profile. For instance, I work with raw denoise and I lower that to 0.004, and I apply some denoise profile by reducing here strength. Let me see here how we started. We started here. Let me take a snapshot, and we are now here in raw denoise. Take snapshot. Oops. So this is how we started, only with the lens correction performed, and this is how we ended, you see? And then you can perform some adjustment to taste beyond those that I showed here. Let me remove that. And for instance, in this image, I would probably change that from automatic to manual. And since I added contrast to the colors, I would probably reduce this a little bit. And that's a good looking image in my opinion. You can also add some vibrance here to the colors if you want. You can also play around with Velvia, which affects colors. You can also play around with color contrast. And so there are several modules that can be used with color images. But that's probably what I would do. So first perform some lens correction, then shadows and highlights recovery, add some local contrast, add some overall contrast with the tone curve, add some contrast, some color contrast using the color balance module, and finally do some denoising. It's also recommended that you do any denoising operations at the end because they are very computer intensive. So that's what I would do to this image, and those are the basic modules that we use with color images.